Mr. President, I would like to very warmly thank our Western colleagues for convening this Security Council meeting on Ukraine, because a huge corruption scandal has just erupted there. It involves top officials of the Kyiv regime. For us, this comes as no surprise. At almost every meeting, we have told you that you are dealing with a thieving, corrupt pack profiting from war with your money. It was not even a secret that fell open. It was so obvious that only the blind could fail to notice it. And here one is tempted to ask a question from a well-known skit which would be familiar to Russian and Ukrainian audiences. Question, where's the money? Answer, what money? On the 10th of November, the Ukraine's National Anti-Corruption Bureau, after a series of searches, reported uncovering large-scale embezzlement at Energoatom, which is the operator of Ukraine's nuclear power plants. According to the investigation, the organizer and the main beneficiary of the illegal enrichment scheme was Timur Mindich, Zelensky's longtime associate. NABU says that in just 1 year, members of this criminal network laundered about $100 million in kickbacks. And the same corruption scheme operated in the defense sector. The true scale of this scandal is something that we can only guess at right now, but here's just the tip of the iceberg. I haven't heard anyone at this meeting say a word about that. Meanwhile, Zelensky continues to tour European cities, begging for money and weapons to spend it for his own benefit and that of his inner circle. But Europe has no money left for Ukraine. Europe needs to rearm its own armies to prepare, as they hysterically claim, be ready for war with Russia by 2030. And where will they get money for Ukraine? Well, they can be stolen by stealing Russia's sovereign assets, for example. But this hasn't worked so far. So they resort to whipping up anti-Russian hysteria to scare and unsettle impressionable Europeans. For example, with alleged Russian drones entering airspace, the UK Defence Secretary John Healey dispatched British fighters and a frigate to monitor the Russian oceanographic vessel called Yantar. No sooner had an incident occurred with damaged railway tracks in Poland committed, according to the Polish authorities themselves, by 2 Ukrainians, than Warsaw declared, clearly without showing any evidence of the fact that the trail leads to Russia, because it was an act of state terrorism carried out by Ukrainians working for Russian intelligence. And the speed of arriving at such conclusions by Polish authorities is truly astounding. We, after all, remember well who was the first to thank the United States in the Biden administration for the Nord Stream terrorist attack. It was Poland's current foreign minister, Sikorski. Now, on the ground situation, the position of Ukraine's armed forces remains dire, not to say catastrophic. Russian troops are successfully advancing on almost all fronts, essentially. According to Russia's Ministry of Defense, in the past week, several towns and villages in Kharkiv, Dnipropetrovsk, Zaporozhye regions was liberated, and in the DPR. Ukrainian military equipment, including Neptune launchers and US-made HIMARS systems, are being systematically destroyed, including command posts of the Ukrainian army, fortifications, armored vehicles, ammunition depots, and drone control centers. Supply lines are also being disrupted. Ukrainian units continue to suffer heavy losses and rapidly lose fighting capability. Ukrainian forces are stymied in major strategic hubs such as Krasnoarmeysk, which is formerly Pokrovsk, in Dimitrov, and Kupiansk. Kupiansk has been liberated. Kyiv denies this, citing Russian propaganda. In late October, President Putin proposed granting unhindered access there for foreign journalists, including Ukrainian ones, to make sure that they can see firsthand what the situation is. Russian command was ready to suspend hostilities for 5 to 6 hours to create safe corridors for the press, but Kyiv, of course, refused. And leading Western media and journalist associations also remained silent. Indeed, why would you want to learn the truth that would shatter Zelensky's carefully spread myths about Ukraine's invincible army? Ukrainian failures are accompanied by very brutal actions against civilians, which remain in contested cities. Nationalists call them zhdun, those who are waiting. Those who want to stay and then later move to the Russian side. On the 14th of November, 7 civilians killed in the DPR by targeted Ukrainian drone and mortar attacks were trying to evacuate the local priest, his wife, and parish families as they were trying to evacuate. They were methodically hunted down, and then the villagers were prevented from retrieving and burying the bodies as drones continued hunting for them. The fact that Ukrainian forces use civilians as human shields, place command posts in private homes, deploy air defenses in residential areas, conduct military operations in densely populated cities is something that's also being confirmed by foreign journalists now, who can hardly be suspected of being pro-Russian. But deliberate killing of isolated civilians fleeing combat zones is beyond evil, let alone humanitarian law. Between 20th October and 16th of November of this year, 307 Russian civilians were harmed by Ukrainian shelling. 260 people were wounded, including 20 minors, and 47 were killed, and this includes 2 children. Overall, civilian targets in Russian territory during this period received, at the very least, 13,195 munition rounds. Villages in the Lugansk and Donetsk People's Republics, Kherson, Zaporozhye, Belgorod, Bryansk, Kursk, and Moscow regions were harmed, as well as Saratov, Novorossiysk, and Volgograd were hit. But the UN Secretary General and his spokesperson show neither courage to speak about this nor words to express sympathy for the victims. But they very readily strongly condemn any Russian strikes based on any information, be it verified or not verified, provided to them by the UN resident coordinator in Ukraine, Shmale. We're not at war with Ukrainian civilians. Our forces act with maximum responsibility, striking only military targets, and they're supporting transport, energy infrastructure of Ukraine. According to leaked military documents, Ukraine's armed forces have lost more than 1.7 million troops since the start of the special operation. And this year alone, as of August, that figure was more than 600,000. Massive, irrecoverable losses are indirectly confirmed by body exchanges. When we return thousands of Ukrainian soldiers' remains and only receive about 20-30 bodies in return. It is very clear that Ukrainian troops under these conditions are fleeing en masse. In October alone, the record 21,000 soldiers deserted, which is the equivalent of 4 brigades. To replenish the losses, Ukraine has conducted a mobilization, which is at an unprecedented level of violence. Borders are being closed, bank accounts frozen, driver's licenses suspended, and people are just basically being grabbed off the streets. Ukrainian propagandist here also tries to call this Russian fake news, but international media could not ignore a telling incident that occurred. In early November, Angelina Jolie visited Ukraine, and her bodyguard was detained before her very eyes and taken into a draft office. And just a couple of weeks earlier, the same treatment was meted out to Ukrainian journalists working with British reporters from The Sun. Meanwhile, lowering the draft age from 25 to 22 is being discussed. On the 20th of November, Kyiv Mayor Vitaly Klitschko voiced this idea in Politico publication. And soon, it will very soon reach the levels of the Hitler Youth. Mr. President, despite the encirclement of large numbers of Ukrainian forces, huge losses, violent mobilization, threats to civilians, the head of the Kyiv regime forbids acknowledging the loss of cities, orders positions to be held down to the last man, and bans retreat. This policy by Ukrainian leadership has nothing to do with military reality and is purely political in nature. Zelensky wants to show his Western sponsors that the front is holding, hoping for continued funding for his war with Russia, and he needs billions to keep the war going for his own enrichment and his ilk's enrichment, and so as to stay in power. Meanwhile, Kiev is crying out for a ceasefire. And Kiev's European accomplices of Kiev are saying the same thing. And the price of these calls to us is very obvious. This so-called immediate and urgent ceasefire is needed for Ukraine only to make sure that the defeated forces get a long-awaited breather. As for the hypocritical appeals for peace from our former European partners, neither Zelensky nor his handlers seek peace. An escalation serves their interests. Just last week, Ukraine's first deputy foreign minister, well known to us all, Mr. Kyslytsya, openly said that Kyiv has officially suspended peace talks with Moscow. In fact, since the summer, Ukraine stopped responding to Russia's proposals, including proposals to create working groups on political, humanitarian, and military issues. As regards the current statements made by Zelensky from Istanbul and European capitals, well, they are nothing but an attempt to distract from the monstrous corruption scandal. From day one, we have been clearly stating the goals of the special military operation. Ukraine, outside of all alliances, its denazification and end to persecution of all things Russian, respect for the rights of all citizens living there. But we see no genuine desire to sit down and discuss key aspects of resolving in the Ukrainian crisis in Kiev. Mr. President, in conclusion, I would like to yet once again state our disagreement in principle by having in this meeting so many delegations participate under Rule 37 and 39, 7 besides Ukraine. 6, rather, besides Ukraine, and all of them are either members or allies of NATO and EU. They have bloc-instilled discipline. They have no autonomy or bring no added value into a discussion. Every time they waste the precious time of the Council repeating the same theses, which are the copies of statements made by the EU. We are against turning the Security Council meetings in a talk show so as to work out the guidelines for their own domestic use. We think that this undermines the prestige of the Council.